Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. Welcome back. Welcome back to the second part of the reading of the excerpt from Islam and Secularism by Professor Syed Muhammad Naquib al-Attas, more specifically on the subject of knowledge. In the first part, we already covered the part on the first kind of knowledge, which is basically that was revealed by Allah to mankind. And for today, we are going to talk about the second part of knowledge. And I will leave it to my avatar to read that section first, and I'll come back and give some thoughts about it.
The second kind of knowledge is acquired through experience and observation. It is discursive and deductive, and it refers to objects of pragmatic value. As an illustration of the distinction between the two kinds of knowledge, we might suppose a man and his neighbor who has just moved into his neighborhood. At first he knows his new neighbor only by acquaintance. He might know the other's general appearance and be able to recognize him when meeting in the street. He might learn his name, his marital status, the number of his children, and many other such details of information which he can come by observation. Then he might, through inquiries from others he knows and private investigation, discover his neighbor's occupation and place of work and appointment, and he might even find out, through further discreet investigation, how much he earns. He might go on investigating in this way without coming into direct contact with his neighbor and accumulate other data about him, and yet his knowledge of him would still be on the level of acquaintance and not of intimacy, for no matter how many more details he might add on to the knowledge about his neighbor thus acquired, there will be many more important personal details which he will never be able to know, such as the other's loves and fears and hopes and beliefs, his thoughts on life and death, his secret thoughts and feelings, his good qualities, and other details such as these.
Welcome back. Now, just a quick recall of what has been discussed in the first video on this knowledge in Islam. We learned from the first video that knowledge is actually of two types. And the first type is that one that is given by Allah in the form of revelation to his prophets and messengers, and also to as divine inspiration to his humble servants, those who have been loyal in terms of their worship and their attitude towards him. They treated themselves as slaves to their creator. So this form of knowledge is actually the truest knowledge of God, of the creator. But there's still plenty of it that he keeps to himself. We only know, right, the prophets and the messengers and all the awliya, the friends of Allah, they only know what has been revealed to them. And these people are those who receive this special kind of knowledge, mainly because out of God's grace, but also because of their acts of worship and devotion. And these acts of worship and devotion is appropriate to the close relationship between a slave and his master. Just as his master would command him to do, he would do everything without question, and he would do. And as a slave, also we know that a slave owes his whole life, if you like, to the master. So the slave would do whatever the master asks, and eventually the slave would gain the trust of the master, and he would be told certain things that nobody else would be told. And usually people of this sort, especially the awliya and the prophets and messengers and so on, they are people who actually have a correct understanding of Allah, of God. And we as Muslims, for those of us whom I consider as the lesser mortals, the ordinary Muslim, the layman, if you like, we have a chance also to achieve a high station in the sense that we maybe will not be the level of the prophets and messengers, but we can actually traverse and take the same path as the friends of Allah, the awliya. But it first starts with a correct understanding of the most basic, okay, knowledge or these basic practices of the essentials of Islam. The knowledge, correct understanding of that knowledge, and also the practices which are to be implemented as a daily show, or if you like, a daily act of devotion and servitude to your Creator. It's only for those people who have started at least who have started at least on this, then they can think about some going eventually to a higher level, and that is at the station of ihsan. But all Muslims are required to actually reach the level of at least getting started. And getting started means that all the essentials of the religion must be learned, and it is a duty of those who don't know these essentials that they go and seek that knowledge of these essentials and start implementing them in their life as soon as possible. And it is also the responsibility of those who know to teach those who do not know of the essentials. So, in other words, the fardu ain knowledge, the most basic knowledge that is required of all Muslims, the kind of knowledge which Allah will ask of us first in the hereafter, whether we have done these things, right? Those things, it is the responsibility of those Muslims who already know to teach those who don't know. And it is a responsibility of those who don't know to actually go and seek out and learn as fast as possible and implement them in their life correctly, right? And this is the first part of that journey to the state of ihsan. And ihsan, as we already know from the hadith of the Prophet, it is to worship Allah as though you see Him. But if you do not see Him, be certain that He sees you. That means you come to that stage of sincerity, that you would carry out all these what you call essential practices as a Muslim, to have the correct understanding of a Muslim. And even though you may not be able to see God, but you know that He is watching you all the time. So back to the second kind of knowledge, which is largely born out from experience and observation, which is what basically the scientific method, which is considered to be the highest form of knowledge in Western civilization, and that has been globalized to such an extent that many Muslims also begin to think that that is the highest form of knowledge, and that is the highest form of truth, which it isn't. Because in the first place, when you talk about knowledge based on experience and observation, it is at best discursive. Okay, that means that you are actually talking about things which are the subject of discussions, arguments, and there will be changes, all right, with regards to what it means, how true it is, and what is considered true today may be considered as false later. So this is why even in the scientific paradigm also, you have things like what Thomas Kuhn talks about, the paradigm shift. At one time, perhaps the European world thought that it was flat, all right? And then after that, then they realized that the world wasn't so flat. And then they thought also that the earth was the center of the universe. But then they realized that the earth actually goes around the sun. And you have lots of other scientific things today that is discovered, all right? At one time it was believed to be this, and now it is not believed to be that, right? So now it's believed to be something else, and so on, and so on, and so on. So it's a subject of changes, speculation, theories, and so on. So what is scientific should never be put on the same level or on the same pedestal as the first kind of knowledge. And that is why I vehemently oppose those who view that the Quran is scientific or the things found in the Quran is scientific. You are engaged in what I call reductionism. You are reducing what is actually from the first kind of knowledge, which is revelation, which is the highest truth, and it doesn't change, to something which is changeable, dependent on the discussions, the theories that is current of the day. There's a premise in the scientific world today that anything that you cannot measure or touch, or if you like, using the empirical approach, meaning using the senses and so on, you can't measure, for example, then those things do not exist. So if that is the case, then definitely, all right, what is talked about in the Quran, for example, the angels, even God Himself, right, the hereafter, whether it's Jannah or the hellfire, about Qadar and Qadar, those things don't exist. So for those people who still want to argue that the Quran is actually scientific, really, you are talking nonsense, right? So you can't be doing that at all, okay? There's so many things which are actually would be regarded today as unscientific, all right? So very often these Muslims who try to show the scientificness of the Quran also will keep quiet, all right, or pretend not to hear when people quote things from the Quran which is not considered as scientific today. And the fact that there's such a thing as to be considered as scientific today or tomorrow or 10 years ago or 1 century ago shows, all right, that actually when you talk about scientific proofs, okay, it is actually variable. All right, it is all dependent. The idea behind a theory also in scientific terms also that it is true until it is proven otherwise. There's no such thing as a fixed truth in the the modern scientific tradition. So don't use the Quran as a scientific thing. It is, first of all, a book of guidance. The other thing about the second kind of knowledge is that it is dependent on deductive reasoning. That means you come to conclusion depending on certain statements that has been made before, or a group of statements or one statement, and then you come to a certain conclusion about it. These statements can be seen as premises. So a lot of the second kind of knowledge is based on this. So for example, you talk about the scientific world, there's a premise in the scientific world today that anything that you cannot measure or touch, or if you like using the empirical approach, meaning using the senses and so on, you can't measure, for example, then those things do not exist.
Now let us suppose that he decides to know the man directly and introduces himself to him. He visits him often and eats and drinks and sports with him. Then after long years of faithful friendship and sincere companionship and devotion, he might perchance receive by direct and spontaneous revelation from his friend and companion some of the many personal details and secret thoughts and feelings that are now in a flash revealed in a way which he will not be able to obtain in a lifetime of investigation and observation and research. Even this knowledge, given as a result of intimacy, is never complete. For we know that no matter how close the intimate relationship between the man and his friend, or brother, or wife and children, or parents, or lover, there will always be for him that veil of mystery that ever envelopes the one to be known, like an infinite series of Chinese spherical ivory carving within carving, only to be unveiled for him by direct revelation from the other. And the other too will know by contemplating his self the infinite nature of that self that ever eludes his cognitive quest, so that even he is not able to reveal except only that which he knows. Every man is like an island set in a fathomless sea enveloped by darkness, and the loneliness his self knows is so utterly absolute because even he knows not his self completely.
To differentiate the two kinds of knowledge, al-Attas actually gave us a very beautiful analogy, and that is the analogy of when we see a neighbor coming into our neighborhood. And in this analogy, basically, he wants to show us the difference between the first kind of knowledge and also the second kind of knowledge. And also, very importantly, also to tell us actually that we ourselves do not know very much about ourselves except what we have been told. The observations we make of a new neighbor is similar to the kind of knowledge that is associated with the second kind of knowledge, which is basically based on experience and observation, right? And this is because when we see a new neighbor coming into our neighborhood, we would see them coming out at a certain time of the day, right? And we may see, we may soon learn how to recognize their features by observing them. We know they look like that. They tend to wear certain type of clothes, right? And then you also learn that they would be driving off in a certain kind of car. They'll be back home at a certain time of day, right? How many children they have, when you see that kids coming out with the parents and so on, or whether he's a single parent or she's a single parent, whatever. It's just through sheer observation and our experience with them, that little experience that we had with them. All right. So, and maybe we may even be able to make some deductions about our neighbor. For example, most of the time we watch them, they go out at a certain time of day, then they come back at a certain time of, in the evening. So we sort of surmise that, oh, they're probably working office, the usual office hours, maybe a 9 to 5 job. Okay. Then sometimes then after this, maybe in a certain time of the year, let's say during the school holidays, right, you would see them all packing up their things, and you just see them going off with their children and all that. And then after that, you don't see them for several days. Then you would assume, also you deduce, all right, that they've gone for a holiday. And when they come back, all right, and maybe they look a bit more tan than usual, then you can deduce that maybe that they've gone to somewhere where it is pretty warm, right, where they got a bit of tan from the sun. So that's the deduction, and all these things is from what you call from just your reasoning process, from your observation, all right, from the experience that you also have, because you yourself knows that if you go to a place which is warm, you tend to get suntanned, all right. So you make that kind of deduction based on your observation and your experience. So the second kind of knowledge is that is of that nature. All right, but whether that is true or not, we do not know. Whether they've gone for a holiday or otherwise, we do not know unless we actually try to get to know them a bit better. And that's the next stage usually. All right, when we get to know neighbors a bit more, all right, we talk to them, then maybe we know their name, all right, and then maybe we can ask, hey, I have not seen you for a while. And they may say, although you know they've gone, all right, but you say, I've not seen you for a while. And they say, oh, I went for this such and such a place on a holiday, all right, and so on. And then only when they tell you, then it's confirmed that what you have deduced is right or wrong. Okay? And it can be wrong. Your deductions may be wrong. So this is the first kind of knowledge. So you get to know the person, and the more you get to know the person, the more intimate you come to the person begins to trust you. And the person begins to trust you, and then he would start talking about things that you can never deduce. All right, like things that what he hopes for, what he longs to achieve, all right, his concerns, his worries, and so on. Those things will not be told to anybody, not to just an acquaintance, but to somebody who is more intimate. So the same way also, when you talk about the first kind of knowledge, that's the kind of knowledge that similarly is just like what the neighbor would tell you if you are already close to the neighbor. So in the case of the first kind of knowledge, you are only able to get that kind of knowledge only if you are close to Allah through your service, correct understanding of what He wants you to do, and so on. You show that loyalty, that you can be trusted first, then only you will get that kind of knowledge. And it's a special kind of knowledge. It's not the same as the one that you can just observe by just standing from afar. You can't, or not getting involved, or not getting closer. You will never get that kind of knowledge. So that alone, from this analogy, you see that I think al-Attas briefly illustrated, right, the difference between the first kind of knowledge and the second kind of knowledge. And we should never, never confuse the two or mix them up and try to think that they are all on the same level. But al-Attas also reminds us in this analogy of the neighbor, the new neighbor, is that even after you get close to him, what you know about him is also dependent on what he wants to reveal to you. You will never know everything about him. So pause and reflect on that. You will never know everything about him. And that is the nature of God. Okay? If I can use the word nature, all right? That's what God is like. He will only reveal what he wants to reveal, right? And only to those trusted few. And even that, not everything. We will never know everything that is with Allah. Never at all. Okay? So when we are in that kind of situation, we are grateful that He has taken us into intimacy, that He has brought us closer, and by giving us that knowledge, actually He shows His grace, and He also shows that He trusts us. But again, we have to put things in perspective. What He gives is only what He wants to reveal, not everything. So we cannot pretend to know everything. Or we cannot pretend even to think that we will eventually know everything. Because if we, as al-Attas puts it also, when we think about ourselves also, we ourselves most of the time don't really know ourselves. What more to want to know another person or another? We don't know completely ourselves. Sometimes it takes somebody else to tell us who we really are, right? We think we know, but sometimes we don't know. So the one who tells us who we really are is the one who actually created us, and that is Allah. And that is why we are told, actually talking about the soul, which is the deepest part of our self, or if you like, our real self, right? We are told not to go into it because it's too deep. We will never know everything about ourselves, but be content with what we have been told about ourselves, about men, what our duties, what we are like, our nature, the powers that Allah has given us, and also the ability that we can actually, or the potential that we can actually fulfill. So with that, I've completed my short reflection on the excerpt taken from the book Islam and Secularism by Professor Syed Muhammad Naquib al-Attas. And this excerpt is basically on knowledge, more specifically talking about the two types of knowledge and also the limits of our knowledge. So I hope you have found that useful. And if you look forward to more such reflections and more such readings, then please do subscribe to this channel. Do also give me some feedback below, all right? I will read them, inshallah. And I hope to see you again. So with that, Assalamu alaikum.